Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to give my review of the latest episode of Star Wars Andor. Before I do that, I want to remind you that I now have a Teespring store where you can get channel merch, such as t-shirts with the channel logo on it, and t-shirts with other designs, and I'm working on a hat. And anything you get there, of course, helps support the channel, which I greatly appreciate. And the link, of course, is in the description. Also, if you would give the video a like, that would be great. And even better, it would be if you made some kind of comment. I like to know what you guys think of what I have to say. And I like engaging with the people who do leave comments. Okay, so let's talk about the episode. It was called The Axe Forgets. As it begins, we see Mr. B in his bonnet. That's the guy from the corporate security company that is now out of a job because of the disaster on Ferrix, is living with his mom, and he's a little despondent over breakfast with his apparently like typical Italian mom, which I can say because I'm Italian American. Someone else might see a Jewish mom or a, I don't know, Portuguese mom, but a stereotypical ethnic mom, as it were. And it's interesting because his breakfast cereal is like these little blue balls, like kind of like Cocoa Puffs, only blue with I think some beige. And my wife made the joke that he's eating C-3POs. I kind of thought they were more like R2-D2s, but anyway, he's eating the cereal with blue milk, which is funny. And his mother is busting his stones about him being down on his luck and says that she's calling in a family favor to try to get him some work. Cassini, meanwhile, trades prison war stories and strategy with Skeen, and they seem not to be 100% trusting of each other. And it's during this conversation that Skeen remarks that the axe never forgets, but the tree remembers, which is a variation of an African proverb, which means that the person who hurts another often forgets about it, but the one who was hurt always remembers. To put that another way, it means that a bully forgets what they do and moves on, but the victim of the bully remembers the trauma. And what Skeen was saying is that the Empire is the axe and the people are the tree. We see that Mon Mothma has a disagreement with her daughter also over breakfast about going somewhere together that they, I guess, had planned to go, which the daughter doesn't want to do now, as she prefers to go with her father, whom she calls dad, which drives me insane because they keep using that word dad, which it's not, I don't know. In this context, it wasn't as off-putting as the other times because she's referring to her own dad, and it would be a little weirder to refer to your own dad as father, although, at least in common vernacular, current day vernacular, but they of course did in medieval times and so forth. And I think in Star Wars, Luke calls Vader father. He addresses him in the first person at some point, or whatever person that is, third person, and says father, not dad.
I will not fight you, father.
Which he wasn't his dad. He didn't raise him, but like it's the father. They don't, and they have this now thing where they want to use dad, and it's so goofy. Anyway, back on the planet where the rebel team is, Cassini talks with the other gentleman in the group, whose name I can't remember, Nika, something like that, about the state of life in the Empire and how best to keep oppression at bay, if only a little bit. And the guy points out that, we should stick with some of the older tech if we can that predates the Empire because we're too reliant on their tech and it just makes it so much easier for them to take over. So I try to, use as much old tech as possible. And it's also not subject to being traced by them because it's not on their network or whatever it might be. It doesn't have their tech in it. Their devices don't have their like locator tech or whatever might be in it. So it was a really interesting conversation. And apparently he's a writer and he's been writing down ideas about how to, resist the Empire in little ways to hang on to, their, I guess, freedom pre-Empire. It was a pretty cool scene. Anyway, we very briefly see in the next scene that a new commander is installed on Ferrix. This one being an Imperial commander versus the commander from the security force that worked for the Empire, which was in charge before. Back to Cassini, we see that he's discussing the team's exit strategy for the mission in a little bit more detail. And it turns out that it's complicated in a way the rest of the team hadn't realized. It has to do with the way the ships are positioned on the runways, or the way they are configured on the runway when they're not, in immediate use, I guess. After that, Cassini trains with Gorn and the other guys on how to behave like a soldier. And Cassini has to actually show him a flaw in his choreography before they're buzzed by a TIE fighter. He says, the way we're walking, it doesn't look right because most of us are right-handed, and this member of the group is left-handed, and he's holding his rifle in, consistent with being left-handed. And so he shouldn't be standing on this side of the formation. He should be standing on that side of the formation. And they're all like, "What are you talking about? What's the big deal?" And he explains it to them. And the Gorn guy, Lieutenant Gorn, eventually says, "Yeah, you're right. Let's switch it up." So that was a cool moment. I thought it shows that, Cassini, even though he's more a thief than a rebel, he thinks like a rebel. And by that, I mean someone who would have to be able to integrate into like a cover situation where different behavior would be required than what he would normally do. And you wouldn't think that a common thief would necessarily think like that. So it was an interesting moment. And he was thinking about it in ways that they hadn't, which goes to show you that they're not really practiced at what they're doing either. They're kind of a ragtag group that's figuring it out as they go along, which I thought was a cool depiction. On Coruscant, we see that Imperial officer lady from the previous episode is working on her mission to uncover the resistance by going over missing item reports from several sectors or areas. We then see that the team heads out on their mission on foot. Back to Mr. B in his bonnet, he's discussing his prospects with his mom again, but this time after she explains that she has, in fact, called his uncle for the favor that she'd mentioned earlier. And she continues to kind of bust his balls. It was pretty good, actually. Back with the group, we see Vel explain to Cassini that the reason Gorn is involved with the rebellion, being that he is at the same time actually an Imperial officer, is because he lost his taste for the Empire after he lost a promotion due to his involvement with a local woman who he then also lost. Right after that, Skeen discovers Cassini's very expensive kyber crystal and realizes that he's been holding it. And he makes an issue of it, saying that it indicates that he's been lying about who he is and what his intentions are, on the theory that if he's got this very expensive doodad, then why would he be involved? Where does he actually come from? Why is he involved in a rebel group? What's going on? But Vel gets Skeen to stand down. Cassini then confesses that he's been paid by the seller to be there. And he then accuses Skeen of trying to use him as an excuse to get out of the mission, which he may actually want out of, even though he hasn't said so, because he's losing his nerve. But that's just supposition on Cassini's part. But he says, if you want out of the mission, don't try to use your unease with me, being here on short notice and not really knowing my background as an excuse. So again, I thought that was a cool scene, because they're going to do this mission and tensions are high and there's distrust, and we're going to have to see if that distrust rears its ugly head during the mission in a way that screws the mission, or if they're able to do it. So it's like something that has to be in the back of your mind as you're watching it. Are they going to be able to pull this off? And if they don't, will it be because of something they didn't account for, or something that they planned to go a certain way didn't go a certain way, or will it be because they're dysfunctional and they can't work together? So it'll be interesting to see, how that all plays out. Back to Mon Mothma on Coruscant, we see that she has a discussion with her husband about her new foundation, which her husband seems to suspect isn't all above board, but he doesn't outright say so. So things between them are weird. Their relationship is kind of cloak and dagger. It's kind of, well, that might not be the best description, but it's kind of, smoke and mirrors. Like they're not open with each other. Their guard is constantly up, and it goes both ways. So something happened in that relationship where they're not in a good place. And so their conversations are very defensive on both sides. And part of that, I think, is that he doesn't really understand everything she does, in her job as a senator, and he doesn't seem to trust that she's keeping her head down because, and because he knows that she has sort of enemies. And I think he sort of resents that she's not fully compliant with everything because it endangers him. I don't know exactly because he hasn't said, but that's the vibe I get. And in this particular conversation, you can tell that he doesn't really trust that her foundation is really the charitable thing that she says it is. He seems to think that she's up to something, but he doesn't say that. So that's just my impression. Anyway, we go back to Mr. B in his bonnet, and we find him in his room looking at a hollow projection of Cassini. So he's still butthurt over what happened on Ferrix. Not only that he lost his job, but that, just that he got, just the idea that one got away, from him is really bugging him, apparently. We then go back to our rebel group, and we learn that Skeen's brother died by suicide after the Empire stole his farm and destroyed his pepper tree crop, which he tells Cassini about as a sort of apology for what he did earlier. I guess meaning that he's very pissed off about the Empire, where he wasn't before he lost his brother. And so he's just very intent on getting them, and he doesn't want anything to go wrong on the mission. And so that's why he's hyper vigilant about things that could go wrong. And so anyway, that's his sort of apology that he offers, which Cassini says, yeah, don't worry about it. In the next moment, Vel and the other lady on the team depart from the rest of the crew to do their part of the mission, which I guess is separate from the soldier impersonation part that the guys will be doing. So they're not going to see each other now until shit starts to go down, basically. We then again go back to Coruscant in the final scene where we see Luthen sort of hovering over his radio, hovering over his comms, hoping to hear something from the team about how things are going. And his wife comes in, or his partner, and she tries to allay his anxiety, put it down. If there was something to hear, you'd have heard it. And they're either going to be okay or they're not. It's out of your hands. And he's like, oh, you kind of delight in telling me that. And, or you kind of seem aloof when you say that. He says something like that to her. She's like, no, it's just, you can't, there's nothing you can do. And we have other things that we have to take care of. We've got clients in the morning, and I think what she was trying to say is you don't want to come off, to anybody that might come in like you're preoccupied with something, so chill out, buddy. And that's where the episode ends. Again, I really enjoyed this episode, and I know that some people might watch it and say, God, it's, nothing happened. It's all talkity talk, talk, talk. And it's boring, and it's not going anywhere, and it's slow paced. And okay, it is slow paced, and there was no sort of big event in this episode. But like the first couple of episodes, what's happening here is they're building the tension. In fact, there's a moment I forgot to mention from before the team walked off to start the mission. They were going through some of the details of the mission, and they heard a TIE fighter. So they had to rush to cover the guns so the TIE fighter wouldn't see it if it passed over. And then the TIE fighter circles back after their guns are all covered and buzzes them really low down, like flies like right close by them, barely over their heads, and just keeps going. So it's like he didn't see anything, but he saw the people there and he just wanted to mess with them. So it just shows, it's just another, like they did in the previous episode when the TIE fighters kind of are flying around them and they almost get seen. It just sort of builds that tension, that sense of unease that they're going to get caught, that and that the Empire sucks because they patrol all the time and they do shitty things like buzz you right over your head. Anyway, I think what we are seeing in place of any serious action or anything is good stuff. They're taking their time to make this story seem real. So they're getting into the minutia of what would occur if a group were planning a heist, and if one of them was sort of an outsider, and one of them was risking his neck because he's part of the authority that they're up against. And they're making the characters seem three-dimensional and distinct. And I think that that's a really good thing because it makes you, it invests you in the characters. It invests you in their mission. And later when things occur, it makes it adds weight to it. It gives it weight. And so that's not just sort of all surface level and barely intellectually and emotionally engaging. So I think that's what they're trying to do. And it's working for me. And they're even doing it with the Imperial characters, the Imperial lady and Mr. B in his bonnet. You know, it's very easy to write cheap dialogue and one-dimensional characters and to pace a story so that it goes so quickly that everything is one-dimensional. The characters, the situations, rather than being layered. And, you know, in a way that the characters are starkly different as opposed to at least alike in some ways, regardless of the side that they're on, which I think always adds to a story where, you know, there's a bad guy and a good guy, but are they completely unalike, or are there things that they experience that are shared between them? And I say that because I think we're seeing that Mr. B in his bonnet, after what happened to him, isn't totally on board, you know, anymore, sort of psychologically with the Empire and his prior work. And we know that the Imperial lady person is pissed at the higher ups because she wanted to go about crushing the rebellion in a particular way, and they're sort of ignoring her because they don't think it's real, which is what the rebel team keeps saying. They don't think we're a threat. And I question whether she's going to stick with the Empire. I think there's a chance that that character is going to also become disillusioned with the Empire by the end and help the resistance. I think she's going to wind up being sympathetic to the rebellion. I don't know. It's just a feeling I have. And I think we wouldn't be getting these tones and these feelings from these characters if they weren't taking their time to show us in sort of a granular way their day-to-day machinations. And so, you know, I'm just glad that they're doing that. I think this show is very good. I think it's better than The Mandalorian, certainly better than Obi-Wan. So I'm just enjoying it quite a bit. Anyway, that's really it. I think it's a good show, and there's not really much more to say. Just as it's easy to write one-dimensional characters and scenarios, it's easy to pick on a show that's bad because usually there's so much to talk about. But when a show is good, it's more nebulous. You just know it's good. So there's not really much more to say. If the show were bad, I could probably go on for a bit, but it's not. So I'm going to get out of here. Please give the video a like. Make a comment. I'd love to know what you think, even if you disagree with me. Check out the Teespring store. The link again is in the description. I'll be back soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.